For whatever reason, there's always been a stigma around mental health in our communities. Some people say that talking about your feelings makes you weak. But you know what? It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. No matter what you're struggling with, you can call or text 988-LIFELINE to connect with a trained crisis counselor and get the resources and support you need. No judgment, no stigma, just hope. Text or call 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline day or night. 988. Hope has a new number.
This is Dream Power Radio, the place where your dreams turn into reality. Here is your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman.
Hello, and welcome to Dream Power Radio on the amazing Women and Men of Power Network, the world's leading positive programming network, powered by Raven International. I'm your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman, the Dream Coach. This is a show where we talk about dreams, both daytime and nighttime dreams, and how you can use them to make the internal shift to a life you love. Wow. In a matter of days, our world has been turned upside down, hasn't it? Last week, I was looking forward to heading down to New York City to see a Broadway show, and instead today I'm sheltering in place, waiting for the dust to settle. Fortunately, my husband and I are healthy and committed to staying safe, and I hope you are too. In turbulent times as these, we turn to our authors for guidance and inspiration and to simply help us figure out what it all means. So I can think of no better person to talk to about the art of writing than my guest, Susan Shapiro. Sue teaches writing at NYU and the New School in New York and is a New York Times best-selling author of 12 books, including one of the best books on writing I've ever read, The Byline Bible.
Thank you.
Welcome to Dream Power Radio, Sue.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Well, Sue, this is a show about dreams. I want to start off with talking about your dream of becoming a writer. As the old cliche goes, it took you 2 decades to become an overnight success. How did you keep your dream alive through the mountains of rejection slips?
A good question. Well, first, I was lucky that I studied English and writing at the University of Michigan at NYU, and I highly recommend that people do that. And I teach writing classes myself at colleges and also private classes and seminars for everybody, for school of continuing ed students of all ages. So I think the first thing that was very helpful is just finding a community of writers that were supportive and that were, could help each other. So that was a good start. And then a professor at NYU helped me get a job at the New Yorker. So I spent the next 4 years after I finished my graduate degree at a great magazine filled with tons of writers. So again, that gave me direction and community, and I had people I could ask questions. And then right after that, I started my own writing workshop. And that group actually lasted for 18 years. So, and it was a mix of different ages and backgrounds. And, so I would say I was lucky in that I maybe, good start with school, but I always had, part of the reason I moved to New York, but I always had a group of writers, a lot of older writers who I could ask questions and who'd read my work and who'd give me direction. So I would say that really saved my life and my career.
Yes. But why did you want to become a writer in the first place?
Well, I have a joke in my family, which is I'm the only girl in a big family of boys, Midwest, all doctors and science brains. And you couldn't get a word in edgewise. So I later read that writing is a way to talk without being interrupted. So I think that might have started. And I don't know. I always loved poems. The word is that when I was 2, my aunt Etty gave me a book, The Child's Garden of Verses, and then I marched around my house reciting by heart A Child's Garden of Verses. I had a little shadow. So it was Robert Louis Stevenson's, I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me, and what could be the use of it is more than I can see. So apparently from a very young age, words and poems just spoke to me.
I loved that book when I was a child too. So it was just amazing.
Yeah, and there was a story actually, which is my dad, who was a very busy doctor, hard to get his attention or approval. So apparently one day I came in when I was a kid and I was saying the poem, and he was sort of astounded that I was reciting this whole long thing. And when I was done, I think he put his he turned the x-ray machine off and put his medical book down and looked at me and listened to me recite. And when I was done, he gave me a kiss and said, "Boy, are you smart." And so I always joke that the die was cast, so it was his worst mistake, because then I had the mistaken illusion that was the way to his heart, and it actually wasn't. He was much more happy that my brothers went to medical school and studied science and math. But I think he actually later admitted to me that he wanted to be a writer when he was younger. So maybe it was a little bit in my blood.
Mm-hmm. But it did get you going. And you did talk briefly about the role that, having writers groups helped you. And of course, you have one, and you how much they help you a lot. But I also want to talk about the role of mentors, because you've had several mentors in your life that have also been very instrumental in helping you achieve what you have. So
I have a whole book that I wrote about them that's called Only as Good as Your Word, Writing Lessons from My Favorite Literary Gurus. So absolutely, I wrote about several of my, my mentors who really, really saved my life.
Yeah, could you just talk about one of them and how that made a difference in your life?
Boy, I wouldn't even know where to start. Let's see. I would say, the first one was my high school English teacher from Michigan, Jack Zucker, and he was a poet himself. And so he asked me at one point if I would help him type up his poems. He said he couldn't type well and he needed help. So I would type all his poems and just fell in love with his poetry. I started writing poetry, and then he was very encouraging of my work. And then actually after I graduated, we stayed in touch, and he started a literary magazine, and he published a lot of my pieces. And I later learned, I think actually at his memorial service, I later learned that he was a great typist, so that he just really wanted to connect with me. So he was one. Ruth Gruber was another one. She was a famous Jewish writer who had exciting sort of historical books that she had written. She was like an activist, and she always used to say to me, she joined my writing group at one point. I wrote about her, and she was about, she was in her 80s when she joined my writing group. I was in my 20s, and whenever I would complain or get nervous or ask anything, she always used to say, "Just keep doing it well. Someone will notice. Just keep doing it well. Someone will notice." And she had 19 books out, and she lived until 105. So she was an important mentor. Yeah. So I just was lucky that in all stages of my career, I had older people who really, one was a New York Times Magazine editor, one was at the Times Book Review. So I really was very, very lucky that I had great mentors all along who kind of guided me.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other thing that I think all writers need to be successful is discipline. I know it's something I struggle with a lot. I keep doing it, but how do you keep yourself motivated to write?
Well, it's funny. I just wrote a piece today about how to be productive during the pandemic for The Independent. And one of the things that I talked about was that how much addiction therapy really helped me. So about 20 years ago, I had a substance abuse specialist who helped me quit cigarettes, alcohol, and drugs. And in order to do that, I didn't really want to go to, I think highly of AA type meetings, but that I'm better off one-on-one. So I didn't really want to go to meetings. And he basically told me the rules that I have to live by if I want to stay clean and healthy and successful. And a big part of it was that you make a plan in advance for your work and for eating and for exercise and for sleep. And you keep your commitments, and you never get to change your mind because of your mood. And so usually what I would do is I'd write every day, wake up and write, and, determine in advance if, was I finishing a chapter? Was I writing an article that was due? When I was working on books, it would be basically wake up in the morning and get to work on the book. And one of my mentors actually was Howard Fast, who was a famous best-selling novelist. And at one point I complained to him and said that I had writer's block. And he said, "Don't be self-indulgent. Plumbers don't get plumber's block. You just wake up and you get to work every day. And then he said to me, a page a day is a book a year. And that really stayed with me. So ever since then, every time, so I wake up and I have to get to work and I have to write a page a day, which is really just 300 words. So every day I wake up and I have to do, before I do anything else, before I eat or check email or answer phone, anything, I have to do 300 words. And what I actually realized was that 300 words is more than a page a day. It's actually, it's more than a book a year. It's actually almost a book and a half, because I write some of my books are short. But anyway, so that's just what I have to do, in the same way that you wake up and you brush your teeth, or, again, a plumber has to go to work. So it's just, I wake up and I get to work. And I also have been lucky in that my husband and I both, we write by day and we teach by night. And what's great about that is that teaching pays the bills, so it takes less pressure off of the writing to make money. So I wake up and I write, but then later in the day, or at night, I go to teach, and then I teach my class, and then I grade papers. So I sort of have to fight to fit in the writing first, so it doesn't feel, so it's exciting to have time to write, because otherwise I'm going to have to spend my time helping other people with their writing.
I tell you, it's really very practical advice, because when you look at it, 300 words is not really a lot. And when you break it down into these small pieces, it has that cumulative effect. And I think it's really great advice for anybody who might feel, oh, I want to write a book, but it's so overwhelming. And how am I ever going to find the time to do it? But
right, exactly. In fact, when people come to me and say, I want to write a book, I always say to them, instead of starting with 300 pages, I always say, start with 3 pages. And no matter what your book topic is, publishing a short piece, writing a short part of it is always a great way to start. And quite often, by publishing a short piece, it actually gets editors and literary agents interested. And in Byline Bible, I have a section where I have 27 short pieces that led to books, all different kinds of books, memoirs, novels, essay collections, self-help. So whenever anybody has a book project, 300 pages is too overwhelming, but 3 pages is very doable.
And that leads me actually into my next question, because now that we're in the midst of this epidemic and most of America is practicing social distancing and staying at home, all of a sudden they've got an awful lot of unexpected time on their hands. And I know a lot of people who always say, oh, if only I had the time, I would write a book. Well, now they kind of faced with that situation. They may actually have the time to write a book, or they may want to write about their own story, just like the one you wrote about, the pandemic. So what advice would you have for somebody who's never written a book and wants to get started?
Well, I would say go get Byline Bible and do the assignments, because what I have in Byline Bible is I have the assignments that I give my students. I've been teaching for 25 years. So I give different assignments that editors are the most likely to be interested in. So just for an example, my first one is write about your most humiliating secret. Write 3 double-space type pages. And there's many books that have come from that assignment. So I would say, so that's a great place to start. Write about your most humiliating secret.
And why would that be the best topic?
Well, I've been teaching for 25 years, and what I found is that out of any of the assignments that I've given my classes, which are 15 or 20 different assignments, that's the one that editors buy the most. And I think it's because if you pay attention to newspapers and magazines, there's just a lot of columns that are interested in those kind of stories. For example, the New York Times Modern Love section and the Washington Post relationship section, and LA Times LA Romance and LA Affairs, and New York magazines. It's complicated. There's just a lot of different newspaper magazine columns that want to hear provocative personal stories. So I think that, I don't know, there's something about that assignment that's just been wildly successful. I think the biggest mistake people make when they start to write is, first off, the metaphor I use is they go to the computer, they go to the typewriter in a 3-piece suit, and you kind of have to be naked. So there's people are pretentious, or they're boring, or they start with, when I was born, which nobody's interested unless you're a president. Nobody's interested in that. So I think there's something about saying 3 3 double-spaced type pages on your most humiliating secret that is just, people tend to immediately get naked, and they tend to be funnier, because if you say write about your worst experience, it's always about death or illness. But if you say write about your most humiliating, people just write really hilarious, kooky, crazy pieces about, what they do to deal with their OCD or their worst addiction, or buying makeup at Dwayne Reed at 4 a.m, or they're being addicted to juicy fruit gum, or I don't know, for some reason the stories are funnier and weirder, and it just and a lot of people wound up getting memoirs based on essays that they wrote, and tons of books out, tons of books came out of it. So I just think that's a great place to start.
So what was your most humiliating secret?
Well, I've written a lot of them. I've been doing this for a long time. I mean, my debut book that did very well was 5 Men Who Broke My Heart. And so in that case, it was I showed 5 different really horrible breakups. Like, one was worse than the next. So that was a good place to start. And then my next book was called Lighting Up: How I Stopped Smoking, Drinking, and Everything Else I Loved in Life Except Sex. So I always say the first one was about 5 screwed up relationships, and the second one was about 5 crazy addictions. So that was a pretty good place to start. I think maybe, I'm trying to remember, I guess that's probably partly where the assignment comes from, but also I studied confessional poetry, and I always loved the confessional writers. So I think that maybe that's where it came from also, because there was such beautiful writing from poets who I loved about, their sort of inner secrets and craziness.
Well, I want to hear more about this, but it's time for a little break. We are talking all about writing with author, teacher, mentor to many, Susan Shapiro, and we'll be right back. When is a car not a car? When it shows up in your dreams. Cars are one of the most common dream symbols. If you don't know why you're dreaming about cars or any image, it can leave you confused or scared. But that dream could be a solution to a pressing problem, or an insight into a solution that's been bugging you for years. Go to my website and sign up for a complimentary discovery session, and I'll help you understand why a dream is a terrible thing to waste. Go to thedreamcoach.net for more information.
Welcome back to Dream Power Radio with your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman.
Yes, and welcome back to Dream Power Radio. I'm your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman, and we're speaking with writer and teacher Susan Shapiro. How do you know if the idea that you have should be a book or maybe an article?
Well, one of the reasons I say, if you have a book idea, one of the reasons I say start with 3 pages, and I diagram very carefully in Byline Bible how you could try to get it published, because I feel strongly that if you have a book idea and if you cannot figure out a way to publish 3 pages of it, you probably aren't going to be able to publish the book. So I would say a very good test, if you have an idea that you think might fly, trying to sell an essay will tell you a lot. Like, just for an example, I have several, I could think offhand of 3 or 4 different people who thought they had an idea for a book, took my advice, students of mine, colleagues, sold a first piece to the New York Times and got editors and literary agents to phone them and say, I want your book. So it's a huge shortcut. That's a great trick. And what's really cool about it is that you get paid. You're creating art. You're not writing a proposal, which is just writing what you're gonna write. You're writing a short literary piece. So you get to write a piece and make art, and then you get paid for it. And basically, when you attract editors and agents, you've just been paid to write your own book publicity to help you get a book deal. So it's kind of a win-win-win.
It is. It's I would say the easy way to make it happen, but it's certainly, a direct way, because the worst thing that happens is that you get an article published, even if it doesn't happen. Exactly.
In the worst case scenario, and also you teach yourself how to do it, and sometimes it takes several tries. Like, I have a few students now who, on their 6th or 7th try, they figured out how to do, how to get published, and it's very exciting. But it's a good thing to learn how to do, because, there's a lot of things that you have to learn to publish a piece. Who is your audience? And what's timely and new, and what's different. I always say to my students, write the piece that only you can write. And if someone else can write it, let them, so everyone's trying to write about the coronavirus now. So what do you have to add to the conversation that's new and interesting and fascinating and that only you can write? And so they're figuring it out, which is really interesting. So it's a really good process, because a lot of people don't understand that much as writing can be an art, there's really a huge, it's a business. Publishing is a business. And so, who is your audience, and what's the point, and what's your goal? So even though it's great to have all kinds of artistic fantasies and dreams, I try to help my students, have a little bit more, think a little bit deeper about, what do you want to do with this, and teach them how to go about putting it out in the world versus just sitting and writing for yourself.
Mm-hmm. And I know one of the things that you also stress, especially when you're writing a short piece, is starting it off with a timely lead.
Exactly.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, as a newspaper editor told my class from the New York Times, he came to my class and he said, just remember, it's not called old paper, it's called newspaper. So you want to, you never want to start at the biggest mistake people make is they'll start their humiliation and they'll say 13 years ago when I just moved to New York, and that's the opposite of timely. You always want to find something going on in the news to make your piece, seem of the moment and important. An example I give is at one point I was trying to write a piece about, a couple examples. One is I was writing about going through infertility, which really happened 20 years ago with my husband. And I was working on a piece about it, and what's new, what new do I have to say? And then all of a sudden we wound up watching a Netflix film called Private Life. And it was a couple just like us, a Greenwich Village couple who were both artistic. She was a writer going through infertility. And so the minute I put that at the beginning, watching the Netflix film about with this village couple going through infertility, all of a sudden it made my piece seem much more hip and of the moment. And I wound up publishing it in New York Magazine called watching the Netflix version of my life. And then there was another piece I wrote about an ex-boyfriend who kept emailing me and I wasn't sure how to deal with it. And it's kind of just a weird little piece. And then I noticed that Crazy Ex-Girlfriend was going off the air that month. So I started it with how to get rid of your crazy ex-boyfriend. So again, if you find a timely lead, there was another point when I was writing about, I had 60,000 emails that were clogging up my system and I couldn't get rid of them. And I was writing this funny piece about being a technophobe and not knowing how to deal with all these emails. And all of a sudden the next day in the Times, there was a front page article about Hillary having 60,000 emails. So I wrote about Hillary and I have an email problem, and that sold to the New York Observer right away. So there's just ways that you can take something going on in the news or going on in pop culture, on TV, film, books, radio, and recast your piece a little bit so it's not just you telling a story that happened 25 years ago, which is not timely and might not interest people younger than you or who weren't there. But if you can get a topical reference somehow, it makes the whole thing seem fresher and newer.
Do you ever worry about running out of ideas?
No. I mean, I've been doing this 39 years and I still have a lot of ideas. I mean, I just sold, I had a 2-book deal, so that'll be book 14. So I am wondering how many more I have just because I prefer memoirs. And I actually have quite a boring life at this point. I've been monogamous with my husband for 25 years and I basically sit in sweats and write all day and just teach 1 or 2 nights a week. So I don't really have a very dramatic life. So I definitely have worried maybe I don't have that many more memoirs in me. Although the book I just sold, The Forgiveness Tour, How to Find the Perfect Apology, I wound up interviewing 13 people in my life about very dramatic stories they had about not being able to forgive somebody or trying to forgive someone who wouldn't say they were sorry. So I might have to, I'll either have to get more of an imagination and write more fiction, or I'll have to do more journalism and interview people.
Mm-hmm. Well, something that I imagine you haven't dealt with lately, but you certainly did in the past, was rejection. So how does a writer deal with rejection?
No, I still deal with it all the time. I mean, I'm lucky because I have a lot of support, and that's why I think it's so important if you want to start writing, to be in a class, to be in a writing group, to go to readings, to give yourself a writing community, I think really helps. And that helps me, So when I get rejected, I have a very good support system. So I have an agent and book editors I trust, and I have my weekly writing group is so helpful, and everybody goes through rejection. So we kind of just help each other. You don't understand it and figure out what your next step is. And I have a great shrink, and I highly recommend getting a shrink if you want to be a writer in an art field. It's just an extremely hard field to break into and to make a living. And also, you kind of have to understand the motivation of yourself and your characters if you want to write, if you want to share wisdom in the world. So having had good therapy really helps me. And my husband's a writer, so we commiserate all the time and encourage each other and celebrate each other. So I would say really that's, again, being in a class, writing group. I mean, even getting my book, because people, if you just start trying to write something out of the blue, nobody knows how to do that. It's really hard. But, you read my book, that book is, I've been doing this 39 years, and I've had 25 years of teaching people how to get published. And there's 60 full pieces that students of mine have published for those assignments in the class. And there's hundreds more links. So again, you can sort of educate yourself on how this is done. Nobody sits in the basement and gets on their computer and writes something brilliant and sends it to the New Yorker at 4 a.m. and gets a yes. It's a very collaborative field. And so there's a lot of ways that you can make it easier for yourself, which is, read what you want to be writing. There's great instruction books out there. There's great classes. There's online classes. There's seminars. You could hire a ghost editor to help you. So there's all kinds of ways that you can make it easier.
Well, what do you think is the biggest mistake that a lot of would-be writers make?
Well, they don't read. They don't read what they want to write, so they're writing in a vacuum. So every term I get some student that comes to me and says, "I have this great idea for a book. I want to write a book on how I'm going to quit drinking." And I say, go to the library, go to Barnes and Noble. There's 20,000 books that are already written on that exact topic, and you haven't even stopped yet. So it's not that you can't write about it, but you sort of want a literary context for something you're writing. So if you go and read similar books, then it gives you more knowledge of what's already out there and what do you have to add to the conversation. I mean, just for an example, when I wanted to write an addiction book, I went to the library and I went to the bookstores and I saw hundreds of addiction books and I read a lot of them. And what I found was that there were tons of books on quitting drinking, on quitting crack, on quitting heroin, on quitting cocaine. There were no funny first-person books at the time out about quitting cigarettes. Cigarettes and pot were my main addictions. So the minute that I read 50 books and I thought, oh, this is a really huge genre of addiction books, addiction memoirs, and nobody has written, here's my group, here's my people, here's where I fit in, and here's what I can add to the conversation, because nobody has ever taken quitting cigarettes and dope as seriously as they do other drugs and alcohol. And that was my niche, and that sold to Lighting Up How I Stopped Smoking, Drinking, and Everything Else I Loved in Life Except Sex, sold to Random House, because because in the research I found it was already a known genre, but there was a gap, and I was able to fill it. So sometimes something as stupid as just reading what's out there, Googling, going to the library makes a huge difference. And so I would say, it's great to just give it a try and want to have fun, but it's hard to jump in. It's hard to jump in if you don't have a background. So luckily, if you do research and do your homework and do some reading, you can jump ahead and then it becomes easier.
Okay. You touched briefly on the new 2-book deal that you have. Can you give us a little taste about what we can expect from these books?
Sure. So the book I've been working on actually for 10 years, it's called The Forgiveness Tour, How to Find the Perfect Apology. And that's a memoir. It's kind of a sequel to Lighting Up because it involves a huge falling out I had with my addiction therapist. And the basic idea of that is, what do you do if the person that hurts you most refuses to apologize? And I not only wound up interviewing 13 people who had very extreme, fascinating stories of an apology that they couldn't get, but I also wound up interviewing a lot of clergy, rabbis from conservative, reform, humanist, and Orthodox backgrounds and Hasidic backgrounds. And I interviewed imams and swamis and reverends and priests about different ways of looking at forgiveness and different wisdom about when you should forgive someone and how you could find it in your heart to forgive and when you should never forgive. So I'm very excited about that book. And then the other book is I'm doing a sequel to Byline Bible, and it is called The Book Bible: How to Sell Your Manuscript No Matter What Genre Without Going Broke or Insane. And so in that case, I'm going to talk about every chapter is going to kind of describe and explain how to launch a different kind of book. So I already did one on memoirs. If you want to do an anthology, if you want to do an essay collection, if you want to do young adult, if you want to do a novel, if you want to do science fiction. So there's a lot of great books out there, like how to write a novel or how to write a memoir, but I've always been frustrated because I cross genres. So it always seemed like you have to buy a whole book for every single genre. So I wanted to write one book that has them all. And they always say you should teach the class that you wanted to take and read and write the book that you wanted to read. And this is the book I needed to read.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait for them to come out. We're just about out of time. So Susan, how can people find out more about you and your work?
They can go to my website, Susan Shapiro Net, and I'm on Facebook, and you could follow me, and I'm on Twitter at Susan Shapiro Net, and I'm on Instagram at ProfSue123, and it's very easy if you Google me to find my email address, and Byline Bible is available at all bookstores and online and brick and mortar. So I'm very accessible, and because I have to cold call and cold email so many different editors and agents in my own career, I have a karma thing. So if anybody emails me, I always respond. So if you email me a question, I always will respond to it. So if anybody has anything in particular that they want to ask me, feel free. I'm very open. In fact, one of the best pieces of advice my addiction specialist gave me was to stay happy and successful and clean and sober. He said to me, lead the least secretive life you can. So I'll leave you with that advice.
I think that's great advice to leave us with. And Susan, thank you so much for being with us. We've been speaking with author and writing teacher Susan Shapiro about the art and commerce of writing. I hope you've enjoyed today's program. Until next time, this is Debbie Spector-Weissman saying, sweet dreams, everybody.
You've been listening to Dream Power Radio with your host, Debbie Spector-Weissman. For more information on Debbie or to sign up for her newsletter, go to dreampowerradio.com. This has been Dream Power Radio on the amazing Women and Men of Power Network, the world's leading positive programming network, powered by Raven International.